There's a girl in your bed.
And a pineapple. Am I the only one who's curious about the pineapple?
How I Met Your Mother is a present-day romantic comedy told in retrospect through the familiar guiding voice of America's dad, Bob Saget. It's a show about the complexities of interpersonal relationships, an exploration into the uncertainties of maturation, and the complicated, often hilarious struggles that young adults encounter when navigating the twists and turns of their mid to late 20s. Spanning 9 seasons and over 200 episodes, it's hard to pick out just one that separates itself from the rest. So today we're going to be taking a look at an often overlooked episode that utilizes a fantastic setup to weave mystery and drunken hijinks into a story that leaves us feeling for a protagonist and quintessential beta male, Ted Mosby. This is the Pineapple Incident. It's the 10th episode of How I Met Your Mother's first season, and it is a lesson in how this show utilizes the strongest elements of dramatic storytelling to drive comedy. The episode begins inside a McLaren's pub, like most great episodes of How I Met Your Mother do. As a viewer, it feels nice to meet up with our characters in the middle of these bonding moments, in a place that feels like we're sitting at a table with them. McLaren's Pub is an important location, not just because it's the character's favorite bar, but because it's a place where the entirety of this episode is set up, and our themes are stated. Before we get too far into this, I'd like to take a moment here to touch on the common and popular dramatic principle that writers refer to as Chekhov's gun. Chekhov's gun is an idea created by 19th century Russian playwright Anton Chekhov, which is famously described by stating, "If in the first act of your work you have hung a pistol on the wall, it should be fired in the following act, or else you should not have put it there." Sometimes it's a rifle, but the underlying meaning of this principle is that writers should never direct your attention to something unless it's going to have significant effect in the overall work. So here in McLaren's Pub, we see Carl, the bartender, walk in with some free drinks for the gang. Let's call these Chekhov's complimentary shots. They are going to serve as the catalyst for the majority of the events that follow. The first thing that gets set up here is that Robin is going on a date with a really wealthy and successful guy.
He's not a billionaire, he's 100-millionaire. Why do people always round up?
Now that we've had 9 previous episodes to get to know these characters, we understand that Ted has always held a candle for Robin. So the news immediately puts our main character in a position that is a little insecure and maybe a little envious. After Robin leaves, Ted begins to bargain with himself as to why he and Robin could never be together. The next setup is introduced by way of Barney, table number 4. On the surface, this seems like just another one of Barney's attempts at sexual conquest. But again, in this episode, there is nothing that is introduced that isn't completely intentional. Even this dumb bit about Carl secretly being a vampire comes full circle.
But is there any chance that Carl is a vampire?
That's ridiculous.
No, you guys, I'm serious.
Barney comes back and gives an insight into one of the episode's primary thematic elements. Ted needs to stop thinking and start doing. He needs to get out of his head, let go of his insecurities, get out of his own way, and let loose, which he does. After a little peer pressure and 5 shots, Ted blacks out. This is where the show uses mystery to its advantage. When Ted wakes up, there are a couple of clues that beg for our attention. First, there's this pineapple on his nightstand, which is just strange enough to pique our interest, but not strange enough to seem completely absurd. Clue number 2, there's a brunette woman in the bed next to Ted. And number 3, Ted's sprained ankle. Something happened last night, and it's up to Ted and us to figure it all out. Ted is basically the Sherlock Holmes of his own crime scene, and since the entire episode is told from his perspective, we get to solve the mystery with him. It's fun, and more importantly, it adds an element of instant engagement for the viewer. This element is mystery to the same thing that makes movies like Memento, Sherlock Holmes, or Knives Out so fun to watch. It's high-level drama told through the lens of extremely low-stakes comedy. Marshall and Lily are the first people available to fill Ted in on what happened last night, and we get our first flashback, which is particularly satisfying to watch as a viewer because we get our first answer. But with that answer comes another really important element that makes this episode so great. In this flashback, Ted is obsessively calling Robin to the point of singing at the top of his lungs and falling out of his chair.
Well, that explains the ankle.
And sets the stage for some classic and well-placed misdirection, which is definitely on its way. Back at the apartment, Marshall and Lily are just as surprised as Ted to discover that there is a woman in his bed, which lets us know that Ted will have to find his answers elsewhere. The writers also add another clue by the way of Ted's burned jacket. The writers are solving the minor issues and bringing up new ones, while we all try to solve the mystery of who is in Ted's bed. Our next witness in this caper is Barney, who has been sleeping in the bathtub and gives us a little more information.
Hello.
Hey guys, I'm going to take a quick pause here to tell you a little bit about why I partnered with CuriosityStream for this video. CuriosityStream is smart TV for your smart TV. It has thousands of documentaries and nonfiction TV shows on topics like history, science, tech, and travel. And one of the best parts about CuriosityStream is you can stream it from any device, anytime, anywhere. So use the code Nerdstalgic to sign up and it'll just be $14.99 for the whole year. We now know that not only did Ted return to McLaren's pub, he called Robin again, and Barney set Ted's coat on fire for doing it. The coat mystery is solved, and again, just as in Great Mystery, when one question gets answered, another one arises. It keeps us guessing, it keeps us wondering, and it keeps us engaged. The phone number written on Ted's arm is the next piece of the puzzle. After it's revealed that it's Carl, the bartender, we get our next piece of the puzzle. After Barney put Ted to bed, he returned to the bar a third time, got cut off, and made another phone call to who, we assume from Ted's past drunk dialing history, is Robin. He invited her over, she came over, and that solves the mystery of who the girl in Ted's bed is. Back at the apartment, the mystery is solved, and we're all anticipating the awkward conversation that Ted is about to have with Robin when Ted receives a phone call from Robin. This is high-level misdirection that is just as effective as The Sixth Sense, Psycho, The Prestige, and, well, you name it. For the entire episode, we have been sitting with the feeling that the woman in the bed may be Robin to a degree of near certainty, and now we have definitive proof that it isn't. It's really good writing, and it adds to the drama of what's going on. Robin invites herself over, and we learn that the woman in the bed is Trudy, one of the women from table number 4 who we saw at the top of the episode. Now Trudy unveils the final piece of the evening. Ted exchanges numbers with her and accidentally dials her number instead of Robin's, and she came over for a hookup. Ted hides Trudy, Robin shows up, and we get this great moment of understanding, while Robin and Ted set some healthy boundaries for one another. This is a little bit of a lose-lose situation for Ted, as the girl he loves cements himself in the friend zone, and the girl he liked was embarrassed to the point of climbing out the window. We get a nice little wrap-up here and the voiceover, and that's that. Our characters learned what it means to be friends despite their underlying feelings for one another, which hits at our top theme of stop thinking and start doing. Ted is going to stop overthinking how he can remain friends with Robin, and he's going to start actively trying to demonstrate that friendship to her. It's a great lesson learned in kind of a backwards way. The Pineapple Incident is an episode of a primetime sitcom that feels, at its core, just as exciting and intriguing as any mystery or thriller. It's a prime example of how comedy and drama are deeply intertwined and utilize the same elements of storytelling to great success. Mel Brooks was once quoted saying, "Tragedy is when I cut my finger. Comedy is when you fall into an open sewer and die." The quote is a statement on comedy being at its best when it comes from the most serious situations. When you write your comedies as if they are thrillers or dramas, they end up feeling more real, and that's what resonates with us and makes us laugh. Reality. The episode uses every part of the buffalo. Every element introduced throughout the episode is used to either add to the plot or have an effect on our characters' emotional investments and what is going on around them. Whether it's Chekhov's gun, Chekhov's free shots, or even Chekhov's pineapple, everything a writer creates should be intentional. Otherwise, it's just wasted space and time. But wait, what about the pineapple? There was actually an exclusive clip released on BuzzFeed that showed where the pineapple actually came from. Captain George Van Smoot leaves them on his front porch as a symbol of hospitality, and Ted stumbled across his downtown residence. So, yeah. Everything ended up getting used here. This is how Barney Stinson was introduced to audiences on the pilot of How I Met Your Mother.
Hey, so you know how I've always had a thing for half Asian girls? Well, now I've got a new favorite. Lebanese girl.
Then Barney turned into this.
I just slept with my best friend's ex-girlfriend.
And I just slept with my ex-boyfriend's really good friend.
Best friend.
Then he became this.
Wow, you have enormous penis syndrome? I've never heard of that.
Yeah, that's the problem with EPS, lack of awareness.
Returned to this.
We really do have a ring bear.
Until he finally ended up like this.
You are the love of my life.
Today we'll be getting into Barney Stinson's multiple character arcs, but before we do that, don't forget to like and subscribe to Nerdstalgic if you haven't done so already. Now, the changes that the character of Barney Stinson endures throughout the decade of television that was How I Met Your Mother are sprawling. Over the years, this character, who starts out as a user, manipulator, and quite frankly, just a terrible person in almost every way imaginable.
It's not cheating if you're not the one who's married. It's not cheating if her name has 2 adjacent vowels. And it's not cheating if she's from a different area code.
Transforms into a hopeless romantic, a husband, and ultimately, a loving and caring father. Sitcoms like to put their characters into boxes, for lack of a better metaphor. In any given sitcom, you have your every person, your ingenue, your nerds, your slackers, your wisecracking goofballs, your mentors. Some characters make the audience burst into applause on entrance, and some characters trigger that extended fawning response when they do something sweet. Sitcoms can almost feel like a game of chess, in the sense that each individual piece on the board operates with its own set of rules. Now, not only is this a way of diversifying a show's content by mixing and matching characters and scenarios to ensure that things don't get too stale too quickly, it's also a way of managing audiences' expectations. See, when we turn on an episode of How I Met Your Mother, there is a degree of predictability that we, as viewers, find comfort in. However, there are moments in which these characters need to grow and change. The character of Barney Stinson is not the best example of how to change a character. In fact, he might be one of the worst examples of how to change a character. The main reason for this is the way his character was set up from the start. From the get-go, Barney Stinson was established as a character who would disrupt social situations out of boredom and manipulate women to get what he wants from them, which was usually a one-night stand. He is a character that was written from the very beginning as having almost no moral compass whatsoever. Granted, this was back in 2005, and comedy was a little different at the time, but Barney Stinson's behavior is still pretty reprehensible. He does manipulate women that he wants to sleep with. He has gone as far as to film his sexual conquests without asking permission to do so.
No, baby, don't worry. The flashing green light means it's off.
And he has even brought up that he may have engaged in human trafficking at one point in time by selling a woman for a car.
At one point, I'm pretty sure I sold a woman. I didn't speak the language, but I shook a guy's hand, he gave me the keys to a Mercedes, and I left her there.
The point is, Barney Stinson was originally intended to be one of the worst human beings on the planet, and the writers spent almost 5 seasons cementing that idea into our minds. All of Barney's terrible behaviors and choices seem to be explained away in a somewhat lazy fashion. The writer's justification as to why Barney can get away with behaving the way he does, aside from the fact that he's played by Neil Patrick Harris, who everyone loves, is usually because he is a good friend, or that he sometimes makes a decision that mirrors acceptable human behavior. While the writers definitely try to make this feel like it's enough for the viewers to move on and accept Barney for who he is, there's something that just doesn't feel quite right about it. This sometimes feels like they're forcing Barney's arc to work, and paying almost no attention to whether or not they actually earned the right to do so. Let's take a look at a similar character. This is Dennis Reynolds from It's Always Sunny.
The whole purpose of buying the boat in the first place was to get the ladies nice and tipsy topside so we can take them to a nice, comfortable place below deck and, they can't refuse because of the implication.
Like Barney Stinson, Dennis Reynolds is an exploitative manipulator driven by his own selfish desires. He lies, cheats, and steals. He has similar philosophies. Where Barney Stinson has his playbook, Dennis has the Dennis system. They are very similar characters, but the difference is, Dennis Reynolds loses. He's constantly trapped in his own personal hell, designed by the consequences of his own actions. Barney Stinson doesn't really ever face any consequences until later on in the show, after the writers have already forced his character through arcs and storylines that they never truly earned. Writing a good sitcom is essentially like someone drawing a caricature of what they think life looks like. The features are exaggerated, but it still resembles the real world. Ideally, in the real world, we want the bad guys to be held accountable for their actions. This never really happens with Barney Stinson. He's just sort of terrible until he isn't anymore. In season 5, Barney begins a romantic relationship with Robin. This is his first major pivot as a character on the show. But even that is done through a fairly problematic lens. We're never really rooting for Barney to end up with Robin. In fact, at this point in the show, we're actively rooting for Robin to run as far away from him as possibly can. This first fling between these two characters goes on for about half of a season, but ultimately fizzles out. However, the decision to put Robin and Barney into a relationship made it very clear as to what needed to happen with Barney Stinson's character in order for his arc to make any sense. This is where the writers introduced the character of Nora. Nora is another one of Barney's victims, but not in the typical womanizing one-night stand type of way. You see, Nora is the first romantic partner that Barney actually cares about, who exists outside of the main plot of the show. Robin and Barney had a pre-existing relationship prior to becoming romantically involved, whereas Nora and Barney were building their relationship from the ground up. Where Robin had already known and accepted Barney for having his blind spots, Barney's relationship with Nora serves as a vehicle for Barney to do the work necessary to discover where his blind spots are, and how to become a better person in the process. Now, Barney still lies to Nora, He still manipulates her, and he eventually cheats on her with Robin later. But unlike Barney's previous sexual conquests and failed relationships, his relationship with Nora is one of the first times Barney faces the consequences of his actions. He's forced to recount all of the times he had ever lied to a woman for sex and show the audience that he is aware and remorseful of the skeletons that he's been hiding in his closet. Sure, it took 146 episodes of television to get to this point, but hey, better late than never. After Barney's arc with Nora comes to a close, he very quickly enters a sort of rebound relationship with Quinn, who he very quickly proposes to. These relationships get kind of hurried along in the show's later seasons. Barney's engagement to Quinn only lasts for about 3 episodes before writers begin pivoting Barney once again back toward his relationship with Robin. The writers then deepen our sympathies toward Barney by delving into this really sad history with his father, played by John Lithgow. This relationship serves as a mirror for Barney to catch a glimpse of where he might be headed. The journey on which the writers decided to take this character effectively humanized as someone who had been largely reprehensible up until this point. Whether or not you think that the writers did enough to redeem Barney is certainly debatable, but up until this point, Barney had been portrayed as little more than a somewhat problematic tertiary character to the show's central plot. By providing him with these character arcs, Barney was able to carry the entire final season of the show on his shoulders as the leading man. It's hard to write a romance around a character like Barney. Characters like this must be put through some type of trial by fire for us as viewers to even begin to entertain the fact that they might be coming around and learning from their mistakes. This sort of comeuppance for Barney allows us as viewers to really finally be on board with his relationship with Robin. We stop seeing Barney as a well-to-do playboy, and we start seeing him as a human being with a heart. This ultimately paves the way for Robin and Barney's marriage, which serves as the through line for the show's final season. And it wouldn't have been possible given the way Barney was developed in the show's first 5 seasons. Barney needed accountability to progress in our hearts and minds as an acceptable suitor to another beloved character. After it is revealed that Robin and Barney divorced one another, we are still on board with his redemption to the point of being excited and optimistic over the idea that he will be entering fatherhood with a woman he had a one-night stand with. And that's where we leave his character at the crowning moment of his final character arc.
Everything I have and everything I am is yours.
Barney Stinson's many character arcs are remarkable in the sense that almost all of them were set up to fail from the very first episode. The writers had plenty of misses with the character as well, but there is something to be said about effort. For all intents and purposes, the writers could have just given up on Barney and relegated him to just being a terrible person all of the time. But the efforts taken to humanize and educate him result in us feeling good about where we leave this otherwise problematic character at the time of the show's conclusion. It's never enough to just have characters that engage in terrible behavior for no other reason beyond thinking it's funny to be an awful human being. We need to understand where the behavior comes from, and we need to see our characters engage in behaviors that rectify their actions if they are to be redeemed. Inversely, if we don't want these terrible characters to be redeemed, they at least need to lose for us to be on board with showing up to watch them on a weekly basis. Creating accountability and consequences for the characters allows us to understand their humanity beyond what we see on the surface. And once our characters face the accountability and consequence, they can change in a way that makes sense with the context of the story, and also in a way that can touch our hearts as a viewer. It can turn something horrible into something tragically hilarious, or it can turn something monstrous into something that feels genuinely heartwarming. Over the course of its 9-season run, How I Met Your Mother proved itself to be a case study in how a sitcom could quickly become a victim of its own success. While the show enjoyed critical and commercial success, its final season became infamous for a resolution that disappointed and confused longtime fans. But the writing was on the wall for this decline perhaps sooner than fans might have expected, and it all begins with the story of Slapsgiving.
It's the one day we set aside each year to gather together and give slaps.
Perhaps the best way to explain the downfall of How I Met Your Mother is through the saga of Slapsgiving, a running gag where the execution over the course of the show is a microcosm of the show's inability to provide a satisfying conclusion to its audience. The story of Slapsgiving truly begins all the way back in Season 2, Episode 9, Slap Bet.
What the hell's a slap bet?
Whoever's right gets to slap the other person in the face as hard as they possibly can, but no rings.
In this episode, Barney loses the slap bet over whether or not Robin was once in an adult film. After Barney prematurely assumes victory and slaps Marshall, Marshall is awarded 5 slaps that can be doled out from that point on through eternity. This becomes a running plot point that continues all the way up to the show's final season. The slap bet represents one of the major storytelling differences between How I Met Your Mother and the average sitcom. Many sitcoms up to this point follow a cyclical format where characters experience conflicts that emerge and are resolved by the end of the episode. The shows were deliberately designed in such a way that audiences could tune into any episode and understand the entire plotline without any further context about the series. Of course, this structure was a necessity in the early days of television, where the only way to see an episode again was to be lucky enough to catch a rerun at some point in the future. As the modern age of television moved into season box sets and bingeable streaming, the sitcom was able to become more serialized. How I Met Your Mother in particular took advantage of this, building the ability to have callbacks to earlier episodes and plot lines an integral part of its structure. The show would even build out its characters' history with flashbacks and references to events we did not see within the timeline of the series.
Float on through, brother.
With its narrative framing device of each episode being narrated by the future version of the series' protagonist, Ted Mosby, the show could easily slide in references to old storylines as necessary. This allowed for multi-season jokes and escalation of gags, such as the slap bet. While 2 of Marshall's slaps in the initial bet were used as throwaway gags, the writers decided to give the idea of the bet a greater focus in the season 3 episode, Slapsgiving.
Well, there, you said it again. Said what? Slapsgiving.
In the episode, Marshall and Lily hold Thanksgiving at their apartment for the first time. Meanwhile, Marshall tortures Barney with a countdown promising that the night will end with the first ever Slapsgiving. The running gag of Barney's psychological torture over his fear of the slap is a great bit of comedic deflation for the character.
Oh God, don't slap me again. I don't want to get slapped again, and the first 2 times hurt so bad, I don't like it. I don't like it one bit.
Simultaneously, the episode also continues the progression of the post-breakup relationship of Robin and Ted, utilizing the show's serialization to great effect. Slapsgiving not only adds a great new comedic premise to the series, but also provides the series with a chance for genuine character development. This structure continues in the season 5 episode, Slapsgiving 2, Revenge of the Slap. Once again, the writers find a way to both humorously torture Barney as well as advance the story of the characters forward. Here, the series introduces Lily's estranged father, and the episode ends with the 2 finding a sense of reconciliation. The idea of the slap provides the group with a tender sense of camaraderie as they each offer one another the chance to slap Barney with a heartfelt speech, ending with Marshall granting Barney a reprieve from the slap, but then slapping him anyway.
That's 4!
The writers again use the Slapsgiving episode to provide both the comedic tension of the promised slap and satisfying moments of character growth. In many ways, the use of the slap bet reflects the conceit of How I Met Your Mother itself. The slap bet has a clear end goal of 5 slaps, while also clearly establishing a structure to these stories whenever they arise. By comparison, the show's central premise of a father telling his children the story of, as the title says, how he met his future wife, provides a perfect framing device for a narrative as well as a clear endpoint for the series.
And that, kids, is How I Met Your Mother.
However, as the show continued on, the premise extended long past its logical conclusion, and thus both concepts began to collapse in on themselves. With the series, the story ended up lasting 9 seasons. One has to imagine the absurdity of a dad telling his kids a single story that lasts 10 years. By the same token, the slap bet itself was extended in season 7, almost as if the writers knew they needed to pad out the possibility of not ending the bet too soon. Ultimately though, when it comes to both the story of how Ted met his future wife or how the slap bet played out, both come to unsatisfactory and frankly bizarre conclusions. Up to this point, the Slapsgiving themed episodes have a clear, satisfying structure. However, the final episode, despite using the Slapsgiving title, completely eschews the idea of Thanksgiving being a part of the episode structure entirely. Instead, the episode opts for a bizarre structure where Marshall claims he's been training to deliver the final slap to Barney. What follows is a series of kung fu film pastiche vignettes featuring Marshall's training to deliver Barney's slap. These sequences contain each of the central characters as martial arts movie archetypes, and attempting to upend the expectations of the audience, the writers of How I Met Your Mother instead left the viewer completely baffled. Perhaps the lesson to be learned here is that it's sometimes okay to fulfill the exact expectations of your viewers. When a series like How I Met Your Mother has gone on for a decade, the desire to break from formula and convention can be overpowering, and it can also be very successful. However, it's important to reflect on what tropes you're choosing to subvert and what is the artistic value in that subversion. Upending expectations just for the sake of surprising the audience will always be less satisfying than delivering a cathartic payoff to years worth of setup, even if that catharsis is exactly what the audience is expecting. There's a tendency in contemporary storytelling to always try and be 2 steps ahead of the audience, especially since modern audiences are able to theorize and predict possible plot points at a scale unlike anything in the history of fandom. However, an ending that delivers on exactly what the writer promised isn't a bad thing. In fact, it means the writer did their job correctly by establishing a cohesive structure that logically reaches its conclusion.
That's all of them. Well, wait. I'm free.
There's a reason why the cliche, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, exists in the first place. The writers of How I Met Your Mother fell victim to this trap. Instead of following in the tradition of prior Slapsgiving-centric episodes, they made a pretty hollow, bland, and tasteless parody episode that didn't advance any plot of characterization at an incredibly late point in the series' final season. The series had clearly established a pattern of emotional stakes and character growth in relation to the slap bet, but rather than delivering on that promise, the writers allowed those satisfying elements to fall by the wayside. The show's ending follows a similar suit, focusing more on upending expectations and delivering on an idea that seemed satisfying in the mind of the writers, but just left the viewers feeling frustrated. When creating mass entertainment, especially comedy, there's a delicate balance that must be struck between the artist and the audience. Now, sometimes an artist can deliver something that the audience didn't even realize they wanted, but there is also the risk of completely alienating the audience that brought you success in the first place. The saga of Slapsgiving illustrates how not to subvert expectations. Without providing the same level of craft and care, then surprising your audience won't matter. All they'll be left with is the unsatisfying feeling that their investment in the work has been wasted. A feeling that stings even worse than a slap in the face.
Yeah, is this gonna take a while?
Yes. 25 years ago, before I was dad, I had this whole other life.
This is How I Met Your Mother, and it is one of the most successful sitcoms in television history. It also has one of the most disappointing endings in television history. The show is centered around a father explaining to his children how he was able to find his happily ever after, but it fails to deliver on this intended premise. There is no real happily ever after for the show's central protagonist. If you think about the way the show pans out, the ending actually seems pretty depressing.
Mom's been gone for 6 years now. It's time.
There was actually a scene that was deleted from the show's final episode that almost fixes the way this feels with some simple dialogue and character choices. Every year, dozens upon dozens of sitcoms get pitched to major networks with hopes of getting a green light to enter production. Of the lucky few that actually make it to air on network television, only 1 or 2 sitcoms end up standing the test of time and end up having multi-season runs. When a show gets greenlit, it can almost feel like a surprise to everyone staffed on that particular show.
Oh my God! Okay, it's happening. Everybody stay calm.
What's the procedure, everyone? What's the procedure?
Stay calm!
The conversation shifts from, how can we get this show on the air, to how can we make this show last? And many sitcoms have a difficult time figuring out the latter. Studios spend an inordinate amount of time tweaking content. Sometimes great content gets lost in the relationship between the studio and the production, but normally these cuts and edits make at least some form of sense. The exclusion of this deleted scene from How I Met Your Mother almost makes no sense whatsoever, once you see how it fits into the narrative. A large part of How I Met Your Mother's success can be chalked up to the premise that is made at the beginning and end of nearly every episode.
You were telling us how you met Mom.
In excruciating detail.
Constantly reminding us as an audience that we are listening to a story that is being told to children basically cements the idea that the show will have a cohesive beginning, middle, and end in our minds. The primary source of romantic tension in How I Met Your Mother is delivered through the relationship of Ted Mosby and Robin Scherbatsky. We spend a lot of time rooting for Ted and Robin to get together. During the course of the show, the audience is forced to bear witness to Ted and Robin screwing up any chance at a successful relationship. Every time it happens, we get more and more frustrated as viewers.
You did break up.
Yep.
Relationship shakeups are a big part of any sitcom's lasting development. If things become stale and predictable, audiences move on very quickly. Sometimes these shakeups can work to be a surprising benefit to a sitcom's overarching story, and sometimes they can make absolutely zero sense whatsoever. How I Met Your Mother's relationship shakeups are unique because it's really hard to tell if some of the decisions that the writers make are good or bad. The decision to have Robin date Barney wasn't necessarily a bad thing the first time. However, going back to this relationship 2 more times wasn't great for anyone's character development. Their relationship starts to seem hollow and forced. The central narrative to the relationship at times feels like 2 deeply flawed people building a relationship out of how deeply flawed they both are. On the other side of that coin, Robin keeps a proverbial toe in Ted's waters at all times, so when you're watching the show, it seems like Robin never fully commits to Barney, and at the same time, Robin never fully lets go of Ted.
Hey, we still have our 40 deal, right? We're both still single at 40.
I'm all yours.
The way these characters start to interact with one another begins to feel less like they are progressing through natural relationships and more like writers creating caveats to bail themselves out if something doesn't end up working.
I love you. Let's be friends.
Okay, friends then.
I love you.
Let's get married.
No, you're smothering me.
Okay, forget it.
This maybe isn't the entirety of why How I Met Your Mother's finale feels like a bit of a letdown, but it is a major contributor. This unhealthy attachment to one another makes the end of Ted's story feel less like a happily ever after and more like a questionably content ever after. The writers knew this needed to be addressed and resolved. They filmed an entire scene that addresses this exact point in a very head-on kind of way. The scene finds Ted running into Robin on the street while he is out with his daughter, and the two agree to have lunch. This is a moment that had been romanticized throughout the show's run. Ted and Robin always had an agreement that if they found themselves in their 40s and unhappy with their lives, they would end up being together.
Robin Scherbatsky, will you be my backup wife?
A girl always dreams of hearing those words.
As this scene plays out, we get some friendly and familiar banter between the two, but then the conversation slowly starts to shift back into reminiscing about their youth and their time spent at McLaren's pub.
All those nights at McLaren's? I mean, how did we end up here?
During this moment, Robin ends up misreading Ted's intent as a shared romantic interest. This, by all means, makes sense. Robin is used to Ted yearning for her. In a way, she has always kind of kept Ted in one of those in case of emergencies, break glass boxes. This prompts Robin to basically blurt out her feelings toward Ted in the way he has always wanted to hear them.
And I've been feeling crazy for thinking about it, but now that I know that you feel the same way too, I don't feel crazy anymore.
After this brief dialogue, there is an awkward pause. Ted clarifies his intent to Robin, and they actually have a discussion about how happy Ted has become in his marriage and how content he is with his family. He goes on even further to clarify the definition of his happiness by telling Robin that he doesn't think about the what-ifs anymore. Ted has to pick up his kids, and we get this final, heartfelt inside joke before he departs.
Major problems?
It feels a little somber, but it's also the perfect full circle moment for Ted Mosby. Now, this is the moment that How I Met Your Mother desperately needed, but failed to include. Not only did this scene create closure for Ted and Robin's relationship, but it also strengthens and solidifies the entire premise of How I Met Your Mother as a whole. Without this scene, How I Met Your Mother effectively leaves the audience thinking that for the entire time Ted has been telling his story to his children, he's secretly been harboring feelings for another person. This makes Ted Mosby less of a compelling, neurotic, love-struck protagonist and more of, well, a huge jerk. He's sitting his extremely young children down to explain that he basically settled for their mother? That's a little unsatisfying and frankly a little weird. This lunch scene between Ted and Robin is so important that it actually changes the entire contextualization of the show's ending. And it's, quite frankly, a little insane that it wasn't included in the show's finale. Even Josh Radnor, who played Ted on the show, has his own confusion as to why the scene was ultimately disincluded from the final episode. But he seems to insinuate that there was just too much content that they were trying to pack into the final 3 episodes. They're so densely packed, these episodes, and they're always long. We shot more than could be in the episode, which we always do, so some stuff has to go. Sitcoms are difficult to get made. They are even more difficult to sustain over long periods of time. To keep things fresh, changes have to be made to the way the characters interact, And for the most part, changes and development are really beneficial to a show, but audiences still need closure to the primary goals of the protagonist, and audiences certainly need showrunners to make good on the promises they make when a show's premise is presented. The deleted scene from How I Met Your Mother serves as a reminder that you don't need much to create closure. And with efficient writing and stellar performers involved in your television show, you can give an audience all the closure they need in just a few fleeting minutes.
I'm going on this date and I'm gonna let this gentleman give me the business.
Why are you telling me this?
Because I know it bothers you.
This is How I Met Your Dad, not to be confused with the 2022 television series How I Met Your Father. Nearly a decade before Hulu launched Hilary Duff's spin-off, Fox had tried breathing life into a completely different spin-off that never made it past the pilot episode. The failure wasn't only due to How I Met Your Mother's poorly received finale, but rather due to the fact that How I Met Your Dad falls for the same trap that so many sitcom spin-offs fall for time and time again.
Same thing, same time, same
What
thing,
are either of you?
same
What's happening inside of the room?
In 2014, the only sitcoms that were really hitting their stride were Modern Family and the remarkably consistent New Girl. Shows like Parks and Rec and How I Met Your Mother were preparing for their respective series finales. During these moments, networks have big shoes and even bigger advertising coffers to fill, which brings us to a moment in the entertainment industry known as pilot season. When it comes to greenlighting a sitcom, television studios can be relatively risk-averse. The simpler it is to explain your concept, the easier it is for studio executives to understand where it might fit into their content rotation. How I Met Your Mother was one of the most successful sitcoms on CBS's rotation. Creating a spin-off series likely seemed like a simple pathway to maintain a similar revenue stream. Hey, remember all that money we made with How I Met Your Mother? Let's do the same thing again.
Sweet, sweet $5, you're finally mine.
How I Met Your Dad should have been a slam dunk. The writing team of Craig Thomas and Carter Bays were returning from How I Met Your Mother, and they also brought on SNL alum Emily Spivey to help pen the script. The show features an attractive, charismatic cast and touches on some progressive themes. Writer and indie film darling Greta Gerwig was cast to play the show's central protagonist, Sally, with Meg Ryan providing the vocal talent for her older future self.
I've dusted off this typewriter to tell you the story of How I Met Your Dad.
Workaholics Anders Holm plays her ex-husband Gavin, and the show would have introduced us to an at-the-time unknown Drew Tarver and Andrew Santino. On paper, this feels like that right show, right time recipe that networks search tirelessly for with little to no avail. However, just because something looks good doesn't mean it's going to taste good.
You're gonna love it. Take a sip. A Chardonnay. Todd, you're a professional chef.
The pilot episode of How I Met Your Dad is messy, to say the least. It feels completely rushed and comes off as if someone filmed an unedited rough draft of a screenplay rather than a fully conceptualized television show. While there are definitely a few charming moments peppered in throughout the episode's 22-minute runtime, the jokes feel largely flat, and the emotional core of the story is almost non-existent. The first 5 minutes of the show are like someone trying incredibly hard to get someone to like them despite their glaring red flags present the moment they walk into a room. If we compare this completely over-the-top scene to the first time we see McLaren's pub in How I Met Your Mother, we can see a stark contrast in how these locations are set up. McLaren's is introduced to us during a humorous and heartfelt conversation between Barney Stinson and Ted Mosby.
Ted, I'm gonna teach you how to live. Barney, we met at the urinal.
All right.
This conversation sets up these characters in a grounded way, and the scene relies on the emotions and relationships to drive the comedy. The opening scene of How I Met Your Dad doesn't achieve any of this. It fails to tell us who these characters are to each other, why we should care about these characters, and most importantly, it fails to create characters that feel like real human beings. There is nothing endearing about disrupting a bar with a bullhorn for no reason other than having found a bullhorn. On top of that, what 20-something can afford to buy a bar that has reached maximum occupancy a round of shots? The writers spend almost zero time introducing us to this new cast or telling us why we should care, and instead jump straight into these zany antics that haven't been earned in any way, shape, or form. Take, for instance, this ringtone bit at the top of the show.
This is my favorite song. It's set to ringtone called xylophone.
This is clearly inserted as one of the catchphrase bits that became so popular with How I Met Your Mother.
Audience, say it with me. Legendary.
These bits and catchphrases almost always serve to deepen the pre-existing character traits present in who we are observing on screen. The issue How I Met Your Dad runs into is that it seems to use these tropes to define their characters without doing any of the necessary developmental labor to actually make them feel real. Greta Gerwig's character didn't resonate with test audiences. In an interview with Stephen Colbert, she revealed that during one test screening, the audience was given a knob to turn to the right when they liked something and the left when they didn't like something.
Apparently, they turned the knob to the left every time I came on.
Oh no. Rather than set up the series with Sally dealing with the insurmountable hardship that is ending a marriage to get us to care for and connect with her, the pilot essentially centers around her going out and finding a random guy to sleep with. That's not what most human beings would actually do, so as this episode continues down this unrelatable rabbit hole, we actively become further separated from our protagonist. It's hard to connect with a character when they are constantly making objectively terrible decisions.
We're supposed to sleep together tonight.
Oh, God.
What do you mean, oh, God?
At the end of the day, it seems like these veteran writers who created an absolute sitcom juggernaut phoned in this pilot. As time goes on, the writers get further and further away from taking that necessary first step, which is building a lasting foundation for the show to structure itself around. The best example of how it feels to watch the pilot of How I Met Your Dad comes at the end of the episode, where this new crew of characters all barge into Sally's apartment, shouting different reasons for Sally to care about something.
Marriage is beautiful. You'll always have someone to go to brunch with. Check in your bathroom sinks. You're not going to die alone. Sharing a life.
You don't have to share towels.
It's a cacophony of catchphrases and shtick, telling us to care about something when we aren't even sure what it is yet. This is exactly what it feels like the showrunners would be doing in our living rooms if this show made it to air. On top of all that, the pilot ends by telling us exactly who the dad on How I Met Your Dad is. This effectively eliminates the primary writing convention and mystery that made How I Met Your Mother successful in the first place. CBS also took issue with the pilot, perhaps for the same reasons we've outlined today. However, they saw potential in the IP and wanted to retool the concept. Bays and Thomas would only reshoot if they got a series order commitment. When that never happened, the project fizzled. Tweets from 2013 show that the creators wanted this spin-off to stand completely separate from the original run. This is not the case for the new Hulu endeavor, with cameos, Easter eggs, and locations crossing over. Was this familiar ingredient what finally got the show out of production limbo?
That's a pretty weird challenge.
If there's one thing you should know about me, it's that I love a weird challenge.
Characters don't need shtick. They need depth. They need to feel relatable, to feel real. For those things to happen, they need to behave in ways that normal human beings behave. You can't have jokes without substance. You can't create comedy without relatability. If we can't connect ourselves to a character on an emotional level, we can never go along for the ride later on.
It would be the fourth worst thing. Number 1, supervolcano. Number 2, an asteroid hits the Earth. Number 3, all footage of Evel Knievel is lost. Number 4, Ted calls Karen. Number 5, Lily gets eaten by a shark.
This is Marshall Erickson. Throughout the primary narrative of How I Met Your Mother, Marshall provides the perspective of the man in a committed relationship. He's Ted Mosby's best friend and often serves as a vehicle to demonstrate emotional sensitivity. However, Marshall operates at an extremely reduced capacity during the show's 9th and final season, and his near omission is often considered to be a large part of why How I Met Your Mother's final season felt so unsatisfying to watch. It seems a bit strange to have such a primary character relegated to flashbacks and a few scenes in a car, so what happened here? The process of greenlighting a sitcom can be a tricky thing and goes well beyond just creating something that would be widely considered to be entertaining to the general public. You essentially need to convince studio executives that your show has legs, while affirming that your project can generate profit over multiple seasons. And a huge part of that is in how the show's performers are contracted. Lengthy contracts basically guarantee a level of consistency that writers can expect in exactly who they are writing for. In the case of How I Met Your Mother, the principal performers were contracted for approximately 7 years of production. which is the longest legal contract possible in the United States. This ended up translating to 8 seasons worth of work. The only problem there is How I Met Your Mother was greenlit beyond the initial 8-season order. This didn't pose too large of a problem for most of the show's principal cast. Josh Radnor, Kobe Smulders, Neil Patrick Harris, and Allison Hannigan all signed up to complete the show's final season. Jason Segel, on the other hand, was somewhat reluctant to return for the 9th season. Over the course of How I Met Your Mother, Jason Segel's star power was rapidly growing on the big screen. He had found major success in his role as Peter Bretter in the film Forgetting Sarah Marshall, a film that Segel also wrote himself.
You shall not pass!
His playful performance as an up-and-coming puppeteer garnered a ton of critical acclaim, so much so that he was given the opportunity to essentially bring the Muppets back to the forefront of entertainment in the 2011 film The Muppets.
Citizens of Earth, the great Gonzo is back!
Which would go on to win an Academy Award for Best Original Song. It spawned a sequel and several television shows.
And I don't know that you have taste for.
Thanks, that's very generous.
The final season of How I Met Your Mother also had a somewhat unique structure in juxtaposition to the show's previous seasons. The entirety of the show's final season took place over a single weekend, which meant that the shooting schedule had to be condensed. The final season was shot over a period of 6 months, with each episode requiring roughly 5 days to shoot. Headspace matters. It doesn't matter what you do, your vision for your own future can play a huge factor in your decision-making process. Jason Segel's vision for his career extended well beyond being seen as this lovable sitcom goofball, and when a performer is ready to spread their wings and fly, being attached to a project that you are growing tired of can feel like it's anchoring you to the ground and preventing you to achieve what you see for yourself. Sitcom jobs are one of the most coveted positions in the industry. The work is steady, consistent, lucrative, and predictable. In the beginnings of a blossoming career, attaching yourself to a long-term sitcom contract is, by all means, a smart move. Consistent work means stability, which is a rare commodity for a fledgling actor. However, once an actor starts to break, and by that we mean they start to become a household name and it becomes lucrative for studios to attach the performer to projects, things change. Instead of wondering where your next paycheck is going to come from, you start wondering which paycheck you're going to take. This is where managers and agents come into play. At the time of filming the final season of How I Met Your Mother, Jason Segel was represented by United Talent Agency. This is one of the largest agencies in Hollywood. They know how to market their clients and they know how to get them the right work at the right time. Jason Segel was a hot commodity, and prior to signing the 9th season contract of How I Met Your Mother, he agreed to work on the film Sex Tape with Cameron Diaz. That film was scheduled to shoot in November of 2012, which was smack dab in the middle of How I Met Your Mother's shooting schedule, leaving Segel wholly unavailable to work on episodes 10 through 12. He barely shows up, and most of his scenes were filmed ahead of time. This would have been a significantly smaller problem if the season was structured differently, but the fact that the entirety of Season 9 takes place over such a short period of time makes the exclusion of Marshall's character feel completely strange. It's like he just disappears from the narrative only to reappear without explanation. It probably seemed okay from a production standpoint, but to a viewer, it seems really disjointed. Almost as if the final season is held together with duct tape and staples, rather than being something sturdy and concrete. Another issue Jason Segel had can be tied to creative differences. Creative differences, for all intents and purposes, can be the death knell for any project. From Topher Grace in That 70s Show to Dan Harmon on Community, when essential cast and crew depart over creative differences, it seems like it's only a matter of time before the show runs its course. Jason Segel was having creative differences with the producers in regards to the development of Marshall Eriksen. While the extent of those creative differences are unknown, they were definitely there. When you look at the character of Marshall Eriksen, he definitely seems to degrade over time. In the earlier seasons, Marshall comes off multifaceted and showcases a lot of depth. He's focused on getting through law school. He struggles with doubts, insecurities, and relationships. He is often seen as an extremely positive sounding board for Ted Mosby and is just an all-around good person. Sure, he comes off as a little goofy sometimes, and sometimes he can be overly emotional, but that's all part of what makes his character so great.
What is the matter with you? How could you put us through that? That goodbye was emotionally devastating. A certain delicate flower cried all night in the shower.
And I was pretty bummed too.
We all have those people in our lives that seem like they might be a little too sensitive or a little too dependent on their friends. Marshall Eriksen felt almost a little too goofy.
Fart went to the fort. To fart fartly. That's good stuff.
In the show's later seasons, and more specifically in the show's final season, Marshall devolves into a parody of himself. His character was relegated to these seemingly zany slapstick bits that feel extremely forced and out of place.
For the last time, I did not leave the bag of oranges you bought on the roof.
These changes in the character didn't resonate well with Jason Segel, who was trying to book more serious roles and felt like continuing this type of work on How I Met Your Mother was almost a hindrance to his career. In a 2013 interview with The Independent, Jason Segel stated that the final 3 years of working on How I Met Your Mother were increasingly difficult, and that he was in need of an artistic check-in. Artists need to grow, or they can easily stagnate and pigeonhole themselves into being typecast. How I Met Your Mother's final season is riddled with problems. This is not a secret. These failures don't all fall on Jason Segel's shoulders, but his character operating at a reduced capacity certainly didn't help. Sitcoms are complicated, and performers can be even more complicated. In the entertainment industry, there are no guarantees. Being attached to the right project at the right time could launch a performer into stardom, seemingly overnight. Inversely, when your career is starting out, you never know when you may have another opportunity, so you might attach yourself to a long-term project to secure yourself a job for the better part of a decade. In the case of Jason Segel and Marshall Erickson, it was a little bit of both. Segel attached himself to a long-term project, but in the middle of that project, his career began to take off. Not only was Segel reluctant to return to How I Met Your Mother for a final season, he was also hard at work on a number of other projects, which limited his capacity to really bring necessary closure to Marshall Erickson's story.
Do you have any idea what happened right here in this very bar?
No. What happened?
There's all kinds of stuff. I promised Ted we wouldn't do that.
Did you know there's a Pop-Tart under your fridge?
No, but dibs.
This is How I Met Your Mother, and this is its spin-off, How I Met Your Father.
Will you marry me?
Yes! Oh, I can't believe I'm getting engaged and seeing Beyonce!
It should be obvious that one of these clips works while the other feels off. When How I Met Your Mother first aired, the show's enticing premise and relatable humor were enough to kickstart its popularity. But there was an extra bit of magic that kept audiences coming back week after week. It's the absence of that magic that doomed How I Met Your Father from its very first episode.
What is wrong with everyone?
How I Met Your Father hit Hulu on January 18th, 2022. Though it was created by Isaac Aptaker and Elizabeth Berger of This Is Us and Love, Simon fame, How I Met Your Father only got 2 meager seasons before being canceled. While the show's cancellation was unfortunate, it wasn't unexpected, and we can't really talk about why without also addressing the legendary elephant in the room.
Don't say legendary, okay? You're too liberal with the word legendary.
How I Met Your Mother came into the world on September 19th, 2005. Under the care of its creators Craig Thomas and Carter Bays, the show boasted a healthy 9 seasons on CBS before finally coming to an end in 2014. The title of the show and the narration by Bob Saget provided an intriguing mystery for viewers. Though the quality of the seasons waxed and waned over the years, the show's popularity is difficult to overstate. It was nominated for over 70 awards and watched by millions. From the invention of the bro code to the show's many catchphrases which littered our everyday conversations during the show's run.
No one could get laid wearing these. Challenge accepted.
How I Met Your Mother was a true pop culture icon. Due to its overwhelming success, it should come as no surprise that CBS wanted a spin-off. They ordered another show which was supposed to start airing almost immediately after How I Met Your Mother ended its run, but that show would never see the light of day, and that's probably for the best.
Red dot means stop.
For more on why the very strange How I Met Your Mother pilot failed, you can watch our video about it. The link will be in the description. Despite this early stumbling block, a totally different spin-off would eventually get the green light, a full 8 years later, and without the original creators on the writing staff. That spin-off was How I Met Your Father, and while we know the tragic end of its story, we have yet to delve into the details. Starring Hilary Duff as Sophie Tompkins, How I Met Your Father followed the same plot as its predecessor. Just like Ted, Sophie was on a journey to find a loving relationship, and her supporting cast of friends gets up to all kinds of hijinks. This time, however, the show's title promised a resolution that would never come. While all the building blocks that made How I Met Your Mother popular are present in the spin-off, How I Met Your Father simply couldn't meet the expectations of audiences. There are a few reasons for this, but luckily, it won't take 9 seasons to explain.
Yeah, is this gonna take a while?
Yes,
You might be tempted to say that a spin-off that so closely mirrors its predecessor was always doomed to fail. The originality of How I Met Your Mother's formula ran dry years ago, and repeating it in 2022 was just a lazy, half-hearted cash grab. But while the show is definitely a cash grab, that isn't the reason for its failure. Plenty of great modern sitcoms borrow heavily from other TV shows, and those TV shows are often less than original to begin with. Even How I Met Your Mother was accused of ripping off Friends and The Wonder Years back in 2005.
So I guess that decides it. Yep. Hanging out at a coffee place, not nearly as much fun as hanging out at a bar.
So no, How I Met Your Father's issue isn't a rehashed premise, but it's just as fundamental. While breaking ground and creating something totally new is always appreciated, it doesn't actually have much bearing on the quality or success of a sitcom. What's really important are the jokes and the people delivering them. Regrettably, How I Met Your Father struggled with both.
Stacy's handwriting's in cursive. We get it, you're smart.
There's an intimacy to How I Met Your Mother that the spin-off definitely tried to capitalize on. The way the show is written and its use of narration makes the audience feel like they're part of the friend group that the story revolves around. While Duff and the rest of the cast did their best to bring some energy and fun to the material, many episodes of How I Met Your Father were bogged down by a lot of strangely childish jokes and slang that was dated before it even made it out of the writer's room.
If I had to, yeah, she's simping.
Not only was this painfully unfunny, but it made the cast totally unlikable right out the gate. What's worse is that none of these people actually felt like friends. At least not initially. By the time we see the core cast walking the Brooklyn Bridge at the end of the first episode, we can't even be sure that these people know each other's names, let alone actually like each other.
Sounded more triumphant in my head.
Bizarrely, this phenomenon isn't just present in the chemistry between characters, but also between one character and her future self. While the 2022 version of Sophie is played by Hilary Duff, the 2050 version is played by Kim Cattrall, and they don't remotely feel like the same person. There's simultaneously a distance and also a friction between these two actors that makes the character of Sophie feel disjointed and inauthentic, which is a big deal since she's not only the protagonist, but the person in charge of keeping us interested in the show's mystery. Even in the early seasons, the cast of How I Met Your Mother always felt like real people with believable and interconnecting relationships. That chemistry carried the show when it was still struggling to find its stride. And once the show had cemented itself, the gang only got stronger with episodes like Best Burger in New York in Season 4 and The Playbook in Season 5. These types of episodes, where the entire cast is looped into a single activity or adventure, were a staple of the show in a large part due to their utility as bonding exercises. How I Met Your Father was noticeably lacking in these sorts of stories, and it suffered for it. The closest it ever got to reproducing the cast-wide chemistry of the original show was in Season 2. Episode 8, Rewardishment, sees our main characters band together to get as many tasks completed as they can in a 48-hour period. There's a kinetic and chaotic energy to the episode that lends itself well to the group dynamic, and nobody gets their task done without at least a little help from one of their friends. There are several genuinely funny bits in Rewardishment, and just as many heartfelt moments of bonding. These are especially necessary for this gang since their plotlines often feel totally separate from one another, which really hinders any possibility of them feeling like close friends. If the same amount of effort had gone into establishing the group dynamics and maintaining them over the course of the show, it's possible that How I Met Your Father would have been received better by audiences. Instead, there was a greater focus on bringing in cameos and planting Easter eggs for nostalgic viewers who were missing the original show. Misguided cameos notwithstanding, Season 2 was a marked improvement for How I Met Your Father. Rewardishment was just a culmination of many minor but necessary tweaks. The jokes were sharper, the characters felt more grounded, and the show was finally starting to forge its own path away from How I Met Your Mother. Yet, while Season 2 showed significant promise, it wasn't enough to keep it from being cancelled. And paradoxically, one of the reasons for How I Met Your Father's early demise was, wait for it, its cancellation. As we've alluded to throughout this entire video, How I Met Your Mother didn't exactly start out as a perfect TV show. It took more than 2 seasons for it to truly find its place within the upper echelons of American sitcoms. It too suffered from awkward or outdated jokes.
So, Ranjit, you must have done it with a Lebanese girl.
Okay, that's my Barney limit.
And poorly thought out episodes, but it was given the time to sort itself out. In today's age of on-demand streaming, shows are no longer afforded the luxury of time. If you're not a viral hit out the gate, there's little to no possibility of renewal. How I Met Your Father was one victim of this overeager practice. It was struck down by Hulu before it ever had a chance to stand out on its own 2 feet. Was it a perfect show? No, but was it irredeemable trash? Definitely not. It's a pity that we will never know what might have been. had How I Met Your Father been allowed to continue, it may have further explored those all-important friendships with more episodes like Rewardishment. It might have continued to hone its comedy and find a niche that worked, or it might have crashed and burned in spectacular fashion. The point is, we don't know, because it was never given a chance before being abruptly canceled. And that, kids, is why How I Met Your Father failed.
Sometimes in life you see someone and you just instantly know, this is the person for you. It can happen anywhere. Even the waiting room of a tattoo removal clinic.
Yes, that is pop superstar Britney Spears in one of her 2 now famous guest appearances on the hit CBS sitcom How I Met Your Mother. Despite how Ted is talking in the narration though, Britney is not actually his love interest. She plays a minor supporting role and he's not even really talking about her there. But while her character may barely even affect the plot of the episodes she's in, her appearance itself may have saved the whole series and changed its course forever.
Are you as turned on as I am?
Probably not quite as much.
How I Met Your Mother was, for the most part, a pretty typical sitcom about a group of friends hanging out and dating in New York City. But unlike Friends, Seinfeld, or any number of sitcoms with similar premises, How I Met Your Mother was framed as something of long-form mystery. Although it was an ensemble affair, the titular I was Ted Mosby. The basic concept was that each episode was a flashback being narrated by future Ted, who was telling his children the story of how he met their mother.
Is this gonna take a while?
Yes.
The identity of that mother, however, was kept from the audience right up until the end of the show's penultimate season. So tracking clues and theorizing as to her identity became part of the show's fun. But while we remember the series as a huge success today, that wasn't actually always the case.
Am I dead?
In fact, while its first 2 seasons did well enough in the ratings to stay on the air, How I Met Your Mother was not exactly what you'd call a hit. Its overall viewership did improve from season 1 to season 2, but like most shows, it was really always just a few poorly rated episodes from cancellation. That's why it was so alarming when the Writers Guild of America went on strike in late 2007. The strike had the effect of shortening the show's 3rd season by creating an unplanned hiatus starting in December of that year. For a show on the bubble, a writer's strike, which gave fans a chance to get out of the habit of tuning in, was especially bad news. After months of striking, How I Met Your Mother returned to the airwaves in March of 2008, but whether the show's audience would return as well was an open question. Luckily, the producers had an ace up their collective sleeves, or in the words of co-creator Carter Bays, we got a call a few weeks after the writer's strike ended saying that Britney Spears wanted to be on our show. Now, in 2008, Britney Spears was still one of the most famous pop stars in the world, so for a producer who was worried that people might no longer be interested in his show, this was something like winning the lottery. An appearance by Britney pretty much guaranteed people would tune in. It would have been a cause for celebration, but that wasn't exactly the case. According to Bays, she specifically wanted to be in the episode 10 Sessions, which sent a chill down our spines because that's the one where we meet Stella. Stella Zinman, for the uninitiated, is a dermatologist first mentioned in the episode The Platinum Rule.
Stella is gonna zap that butterfly right off the face of my lower back.
Stella?
Dr. Stella Zinman, she's the best in the business.
Which was the last installment aired before the writer's strike halted production. In that episode, Ted tells his friends he's planning to ask Stella to a movie, and they all try to talk him out of it. It was the storyline fans were left wondering about for the whole hiatus, and it would pay off in the first post-strike episode 10 Sessions, a cleverly structured tale that helped bridge the unplanned time jump. Stella winds up becoming Ted's love interest, but she was also something much more important than that. She was the producer's backup plan. As we mentioned before, How I Met Your Mother was a little bit of a serialized mystery show, like Lost or the Battlestar Galactica reboot. Shows like that are especially difficult to produce because of how many unforeseeable elements TV production and success entails. Actors can become unavailable, budgets can change, audiences might not respond to a character or storyline as the writers hoped. There's a lot that can go wrong. And of course, for a multitude of reasons, any season might wind up being a show's last. So if the mystery is, who is the mother and how did Ted meet her, the producers always need to have an answer ready, in case they unexpectedly find themselves headed into a series finale instead of a season finale. For example, even though they always had a different ultimate conclusion in mind for the show, if it had ended in season 1, the mother would have turned out to be fan favorite character Victoria, played by Ashley Williams. With the show still on the brink heading into season 3, the producers decided to set up a new contingency mother, and that was Stella. But given the character's potential importance, the producers quickly decided they wanted a seasoned actress for what could be a pivotal recurring role. Despite some of the cast members having reservations about such high-profile stunt casting, Bays and co-creator Craig Thomas briefly considered the possibility of casting Spears as Stella. While Spears had been a child actor on the all-new Mickey Mouse Club, appeared in films like the 2002 movie Crossroads, and made guest appearances on television shows like Will and Grace, she wasn't exactly known for her acting prowess.
Look, go along with this and it'll work for you. Look at me. I clear $165 a week. I moved out of my storage unit. I'm on TV.
Years later, Bays would recall, I immediately imagined Britney playing Stella and had a minor panic attack because it's such a big role and needed a proven, experienced actress. Not wanting to lose their chance at a Britney appearance, but also not looking to cast her as Stella, the producers decided to split the difference. They cast Stella with experienced actress Alicia Silverstone and created a new role for Spears. That role was Abby, Stella's secretary who develops a weird, stalkery crush on Ted after he buys her a cup of coffee as part of a scheme to show off how thoughtful he is while attempting to court Stella.
You look like a young Tom Selleck, only a million times handsomer.
And as Bays later explained, to her credit, Britney liked the character of Abby and wanted to play the part, so we said sure. That should have been the happy resolution to it all, but as they say, all solutions breed new problems. In this case, the new problem was that the casting of Spears as Abby made Alicia Silverstone's reps afraid that she would be overshadowed by the pop star, so Silverstone dropped out.
As if.
Producers scrambled to fill the role and were able to land Sarah Chalke, who was the seasoned performer they were looking for and would make an acceptable mother if need be. But of course, in 2008, Chalke was still busy playing Dr. Elliot Reed on Scrubs, and her schedule wouldn't allow her to recur as often as the How I Met Your Mother team intended to feature Stella. To accommodate the actress, the character was reconceived, ultimately appearing in just 3 episodes of season 3. It wouldn't give the show a chance to establish her as fully as they might want for a character who could have wound up being the all-important mother, but that wouldn't really turn out to be the problem, because Spears' guest appearance was wildly successful. According to the Nielsen ratings, the episode was watched by 10 million people, which was almost 2.5 million more than what the show averaged prior to the writer's strike.
Doctor, are you all right? I heard a woman screaming in here.
And Britney's performance was even lauded by critics. Bays himself said, "By golly, she put our show on the map. It can't be overstated. Britney Spears rescued us from ever being on the bubble again." Thanks, Britney. It all went over so well that the cast and producers asked Spears to reprise the role in season 3, episode 19, Everything Must Go. Once the show was renewed, Stella was no longer needed as a backup mother. She would eventually leave Ted at the altar in season 4. The mother, on the other hand, would eventually turn out to be Tracy McConnell, played by Kristen Milioti. It was the outcome the creators always intended, as evidenced by the fact that they shot part of the series finale way back at the beginning of season 2.
You made us sit down and listen to the story about how you met Mom. Yet Mom is hardly in the story.
In order to capture the actors playing Ted's children at the correct age in the footage they knew they'd need. But despite the preparations they took, if you do the math, had Britney not made her appearance, the show never would have received the rating boost she brought, and very likely could have ended with Ted marrying Alicia Silverstone's Stella at the end of season 3. Or if the producers had given their big guest star the big role, it could have ended with Ted marrying Britney Spears. It's an amusing reminder that when it comes to long-form mystery storytelling on TV, both audiences and creators need to be a little flexible. Oh, and also, hire Britney Spears.
It's Britney, bitch.
Something's happened. Your father, he had a heart attack. He didn't make it.
If you've ever seen an episode of How I Met Your Mother, then you know that despite its high-concept, long-form mystery structure, it was a show that generally liked to lean into its sillier side.
It's gonna be legend. Wait for it. And I hope you're not lactose intolerant because the second half of that word is dairy.
So it might surprise casual fans to learn that the series was also more than capable of delivering the occasional dramatic body blow to its audience. Dedicated fans, on the other hand, will know that the show's mission was to explore the mileposts of life for the 20 to 30-something set. And some of those milestones could be pretty emotional. The 13th episode of How I Met Your Mother's 6th season was called Bad News, and it came at a time when the ongoing story was leading fans to expect Jason Segel's Marshall Erickson and his wife Lily, played by Allison Hannigan, might soon conceive a child.
Can't imagine anything bringing me down right now.
The episode's A-plot found the couple visiting a fertility expert after failing to get pregnant after a mere 6 days. That fertility expert is played by cast regular Neil Patrick Harris, who also stars as Barney Stinson. This is notable because in a previous episode, Marshall and Lily had, for reasons we won't get into, decided that meeting Barney's doppelganger will be the sign that they're ready to have children.
So you weren't wearing a fake beard and examining girl parts all day?
Not today, I wasn't.
The doctor quickly determines that Lily is fertile, which causes Marshall to assume that the problem must lie with his sperm. Now, Marshall had long been established to be extremely close to his family, especially his father, Marvin, played by Bill Fagerbucky, but as the episode establishes, Marshall only likes to call his father with good news.
I'm getting married! Yeah! I passed the bar! All right!
So the thought of having to tell his dad he can't give him grandchildren hits him particularly hard. As a result, he spends much of the episode avoiding his father, but circumstances eventually force him into talking it over with his parents, and after they reassure him they'll love him no matter what, he takes a fertility test himself, and then spends a whole day nervously waiting for the results. In the final minutes of the installment, Marshall visits the doctor and learns that despite his worst fears, he's actually perfectly capable of having children.
My sperm is fine!
After celebrating with his friends, he tries to call his father to deliver the good news, but receives no answer. At that moment, Lily arrives in a cab, and though many viewers expected her to announce that she was pregnant, instead she emerged with tears in her eyes and broke the bad news about his father's fatal heart attack.
He didn't make it.
The moment was absolutely devastating both in-universe and out, but why did it hit so hard? Well, for 6 seasons, Marshall had been the mostly goofy, kind-hearted optimist of the How I Met Your Mother gang. Considered by at least some to be the only thoroughly likable main character on the show, he was depicted as a sensitive man with a charming naivete. He was the type who never judged or gave up on his friends, and was in many ways the heart of the group. All qualities that made him very easy for fans to identify with and feel empathy for.
I'm Marshall Erickson, but you can call me Hercules!
So, watching him, of all the friends, take an emotional beating was particularly rough. Adding to the tragedy was that Marvin himself was a beloved reoccurring character who made numerous appearances over the course of the show's first 6 seasons.
It's a combination of the two. We call it basket ice ball.
Not ice skip ball?
Ice ket ball? Just sounds weird.
In fact, the series spent more time with the Ericksons than with any other character's family, so fans knew Marvin well and clearly understood his relationship and importance to Marshall. That meant they didn't have to pretend to care. And thanks to Siegel's tender performance, it was obvious how much Marshall felt that loss. Making it particularly impressive was that despite the gravity of the moment, the writers didn't script Marshall's pivotal reaction to the bad news. Series creators Carter Bays and Craig Thomas instead decided that they wanted to try and get a more naturalistic reaction from Siegel. To pull it off, the actors rehearsed using a script with a fake ending. According to Siegel, in the script we received, the last scene was, "Marshall, I'm pregnant." And then they told us on the day, no, that's not what's happening, and they gave us the alternate pages. Minutes before the scene was actually shot, Hannigan was finally told what her real line would be. Siegel, however, chose not to hear the dialogue, later recalling, "I didn't want to know what she was going to say to me when she got out of that cab." To make it work, they figured out a way for him to know his cue without knowing her exact line. According to the actress, she informed Siegel only that the last word of the sentence he was to react to was "it." Once cameras rolled, Siegel would then obviously only get one chance at a natural reaction, and the crew would only get one chance to film it, but despite the pressure, he would later say, "I knew the overall premise, but she came out and she was already crying, and it was so heartbreaking, and it made acting very easy. All I had to do was react in that scene. I didn't have to dig very deep." So the footage you see in the finished episode, in which Marshall quietly embraces his wife before breaking down in tears, is Siegel's improvised performance and his line,
My dad said, I'm not ready for this.
was made up on the spot. Bays would later call the shoot the hardest scene we've ever done, even noting that he couldn't even watch while Siegel spoke his lines. But the characters, situations, and performances were arguably only part of what made the final revelation feel so explosive. You see, way back at the beginning of the episode, eagle-eyed viewers might have noticed that sitting pretty much dead in the middle of the frame was a pamphlet with a red number 50 on it. And from there on out, every segment of the show had a number or multiple numbers appear somewhere in the scenery, props, or dialogue.
Motility 5!
Counting down from that initial 50. The countdown goes on for so long and is so expertly woven into the production design that by the time it nears its conclusion, even the least observant viewer will have noticed it. It finally ends right in the closing moments when Lily arrives to deliver the bad news to Marshall in a cab with the identification number of 001. The last message in the sequence to appear are the words, "Time expired," which are written on a nearby parking meter. Bays and Thomas have noted that the countdown gimmick was a homage to the 1988 Peter Greenaway film, Drowning by Numbers, which also features a similar countdown, albeit one that starts at 100. The show's producers borrowed the idea because, in Bays' words, "We knew we wanted to do something that sort of announced to the audience early on in the episode that we're heading towards a big moment," adding, "It's hard to create a sense of foreboding on a 22-minute CBS sitcom. We wanted it to be a sucker punch, but we wanted to balance the sucker to punch ratio." The countdown gimmick ultimately proved divisive among some commentators who felt it made an otherwise natural-feeling moment seem contrived. But for much of the fanbase, the sucker punch seemed to have landed as intended, and the intent was heartbreak. Carter and Bays felt that loss was a part of life, and after 6 seasons of showing characters growing up, they had earned the right to show one of them experiencing death and grieving without it feeling cheap or manipulative. And indeed, subsequent episodes would find Marshall coping with the loss like a real person, awkwardly trying to figure out how he'll ever be a good father without guidance from the man who taught him everything.
My dad was my hero. And he was my teacher. And he was my best friend.
The shakeup would eventually lead Marshall to become a more mature father and husband, which was a rare example of something we don't see too often: genuine growth in a sitcom character. That's partially because, for an ensemble comedy, changing any character in a way that could upset the comedic balance is risky. And doing it by putting a beloved character through a tragedy that might be genuinely depressing to viewers looking for a laugh is even riskier. But subverting the widely held expectation that the family-oriented Marshall would soon have a child by putting him through the loss of his own father and then using that loss to shape him into the dad he never knew he could be was a risk that paid off big time. God knows, not every risk How I Met Your Mother took paid off so well, but that one was really nothing short of heartbreaking genius.